It's kind of hard to believe. It's been over 15 years since we've talked about this wine in an email missive. One of the great pioneering wines for modern day Rioja, one of the great modern classics. And we haven't talked about it. It's weird. You know, it's weird, but it's also taken this wine for granted. We're so used to the level of quality, the impressive nature of the wines, the power, the scale, the structure, the complexity of what's happening at this project, that we've essentially, it's like, oh no, it's going to be great every year. No reason to tell people about it. Wine's just great again. And this one struck us. This one struck us. And it was kind of like, oh yeah, no, we've done it before. And then I started looking through the archives and I'm like, holy crap. Wow, it's been over, it could be 20 years. Anyway, long story short, this is from the team at Sierra Cantabria, the Aguirre brothers. Those crazy Aguirre brothers, you know, have their hands full with projects in Toro, multiple projects in Rioja, including Sierra Cantabria, including El Puntito, including the number of high-end wines they do at Cantabria, like Magico and all these sorts of wines, and including their fabulous single vineyard estate, San Vicente. And the story of San Vicente is a good one. We haven't broached it before, obviously, in these pages. But basically, the Aguirre brothers went to their dad back in the 80s, back when Rioja was nothing. It wasn't happening. It was industrial, commercial swill, all corporate. And even back then, they went to their dad and they said, Dad, out of our, certain number of acres of vineyard, I think they owned 100 hectares or something at the time, the family did, they were like, we need to find the Rioja clone in our vineyards that gives the lowest yield. Because at the time, the concept was, we're going to build towards creating a wine of concentration, of power, of richness, of intensity. Because a lot of the Riojas were they were laying down. They were overcropped, overproduced, a lot of bad valley floor stuff, all more industrialized, and they were already thinking, how do we get past that? So they worked with their dad, and then they planted in 1985. They found their clone in San Vicente, in their hometown of San Vicente de la Sonsierra in Rioja, northern Rioja. And they planted this clone that they found and started making grapes. And what they discovered was, as they planted the whole vineyard with it, it's something they didn't really notice before, but this clone had a little furry undercarriage on the leaves. The bottom of the leaves were furry. And it was in fact like what they call the Tempranillo peludo, this hairy Tempranillo, that when they planted a whole vineyard with it, they saw instantly that there were less clusters per plant, and that the clusters were much more loose. They weren't as tightly wound. These clusters weren't tight and compact. They were very loose clusters, which allowed for much lower yield, much more intensity, full ripening of the cluster, because the full cluster, all the grapes on the cluster were exposed. So you get full ripeness, you get full intensity, and the results were pretty impressive immediately from this young vineyard. But they waited a few years because the Riojanos, they are patient, and then they didn't make their first wine from this property, this single vineyard property, until 1994. So the vines were 9 years old when they went and made their first San Vicente, which in that year they called it a Reserva, and they got mocked by the other people in Rioja at that time because they're like, wait, why did you pick the Tempranillo clone that gives you the least amount? They're looking at them like, that's dumb. Why There's all these other Tempranillos here. You can get grapes and grapes for miles. Oh my God, why'd you pick this one? And the short-sightedness of a lot of the growers and producers at that time worked in Sierra Cantabria's favor. As you know, the rest is history. Over the 90s into the early 2000s, these guys grew into quite the machine. One of the most successful entities in Rioja, and for good reason. They tend to make, like Muga, which they're kind of spiritual kinship with, like Bodegas Muga. They dip their feet in both the classical and modern styles of Rioja. And the results, second to none. So here we have the 2021 San Vicente, an amazing wine from a fantastic vintage in Rioja, what they call an Atlantic vintage, cooler, where they get a little more of the influence from the north coming into the vineyard, into the vines, which is really what they need in Rioja nowadays to produce this style of wine. They're looking for Atlantic vintages. They're not looking for hot years anymore. They get those enough. They're looking for cooler years where they can push ripening later and get greater physiological ripeness and greater intensity to the wines. And that's exactly what they've done here. Now, these vines, let's see, 1985, 2021, 15, these vines are 36 years old now. These are on the verge of old vines. And we sold the first vintage of this wine. We sold it in 94 when it got released. And it was a stunner back then, and it's still a stunner today. Look at the color. Super big, rich. They're still going for plushness, richness, intensity here, right? There's a modicum of elegance naturally based on the area. Rioja makes elegant wines. This isn't Ribera Duero Toro, where the wines can have more power, more intensity, more fuerte, more tannin. Here, the wines are more refined, but you can still push and get great power. There's 100% Tempranillo Peludo from those now older, almost old, low-yielding clonal selections, aged in 100% new oak, 90% French, 10% American. And man, this wine sucks up oak like it was nothing. Yeah, just a little touch in the aromatics, which is fine. You should, you know. And it ages magnificently. I've had plenty of older San Vicente bottlings going back a ways, and stunners. I'm trying to remember one of the old ones. We might have something old out there right now. I'm trying to remember, but we get to have old ones at the winery. I get to visit the winery. I probably go to the winery maybe every, like twice a decade or something. And each time we pull out old stuff, and it is just remarkable each time. Black cherry, a wonderful faint, almost graphite-y, fading into herbal component, almost like you get from Cabernet Sauvignon in this wine. It's a Tempranillo that tastes cabby. Fine thing, perfectly fine thing. Wow. This is just gorgeous. It has that power, but the 21 vintage, that cooler, more thoughtful year has given the wine another level of complexity and intensity, which is really something. Flawless, outrageously good. The quality of the tannin in 21 is superb. If there's ever a knock once in a while of this wine, especially in the warm years, the wine can come across a bit tannic because of that concentration, that power. You get almost these Nebbiolo or young Bordeaux type tannins, especially with the 100% new oak. In this vintage, everything just glides. Super triple seamless. Press, yeah, it's got press, 95 and up scores. That's not an issue. And what also kind of got us thinking was the price. So we did a special deal. We bought a nice big chunk of this wine. It's usually around $85 full retail. For single vineyard Rioja from one of the pioneers in a great vintage, that's not crazy, especially compared to Napa Cabernet. But today we're offering it at $59.98. And tell you what, if you buy 6 bottles or more, we'll throw another 10% off that price, right? That's a banging deal. That gets it down around $54 a bottle for really iconic, stunning single vineyard Rioja. More than 15 years, unbelievable. It's been too long. Today, we are changing that. Bye.